So I am Pam Selle. You can find me at Pamasaur on Twitter. The Webivore is my blog and home on the internet. And so in this talk, I'm going to talk about 2 to 3 things, really. So I'm going to talk about prototyping and user testing. But then I'm also going to talk a little bit about Express and building websites with Node. And so Express has been around for a while, but I still think it's really cool, and it's also a great introduction for a lot of people to building websites in Node. So between those many topics, hopefully you learn a little bit of something. So that's my goal, of covering that wide range of things in the 40 minutes or so, or 20 minutes if I talk really fast, that we have here. So on with prototyping. So what if I told you that prototyping could save you nearly 80% of your budget on a project? And so that's actually a real example from my friends at ArcWeb, an agency that I do not work for, but they released this case study, and I asked them if it was cool if I used it in this talk, because it's a great example of real businesses using prototyping to impact their bottom line. And so in this case, their client was PeopleLinks, and the proposal was an administrator dashboard. So they prototyped, they used Azure, not JavaScript, but it's okay. And so then PeopleLinks was able to take that prototype around to customers, and they found out very early in the process, by using prototyping as part of their project strategy, that wasn't the right solution to the problem that they were trying to solve. And so because they found that out very early in the project, instead of completing a whole project for something that people didn't need, they ended up saving about 80%. So that's an example of prototyping saving you from doing a whole lot of work that you don't need to do, and so obviously that's a really high percentage of money saved. But in general, prototyping is a great way to find out answers very early in the process that you might not know yet. Because what I want to say is that solving problems is great, and that's especially in engineering, that's what we do, we solve problems, but solving the right problem is better. So hopefully makes you a little bit more interested in the talk. So what's prototyping? So I consulted ye olde Wikipedia to find this sample. But I want to point out the key words, that it's something early to test or something to learn from. So you make it early on to test a concept or process, and is something to be replicated or learned from. And I also really like this quote, and so I like including it, that the best way to have a good idea is to have lots of ideas. In prototyping, there's really kind of 2 player modes, I would put it as. And so idea and concepts, if you're familiar with, say, lean startups or things like that, you might know about the idea concept. But then also there's process and technique. So idea concept is, let's not build something that people won't buy. Let's not, in the case of the case study, let's not build this huge feature project and hire a consulting company to build something that we don't need yet. So testing out the idea or concept to see if it's solving the right problem, but also process or technique. So I use this methodology when we need to test out, say, an approach, a technical approach, you might say an algorithm, to make sure, kind of building those proof of concepts before you build a whole huge project around it, proving that it can work on, say, the platform that you're targeting. So building something small early to test and learn from it. So you replicate or learn from the process. So prototypes, I already kind of talk about making them early, but also that they should be quick, because part of the point is to save money and save time. So if you are spending a whole lot of time building your prototype, you are not gathering that cost savings. And another thing I also like to say about prototyping is that they aren't necessarily pretty. And so some friends and I were actually talking on a podcast about this, about the fidelity of the prototype. So how much fidelity do you want in a prototype? So like hi-fi, lo-fi. And especially, I'm not a visual designer. So I'm okay at Photoshop, but I don't know what happened, but I'm just not that great of a visual designer. So I'm not drawn to making full Photoshop mock-ups that look like the dreaded, handoff process that we were all guilty of, well, I finished the Photoshop, so now you're going to build it, right? And so prototypes aren't necessarily pretty because it depends on what you're testing. So I do like to bring in that point about prototypes because when I show the sample fake prototype that I made for this talk, one, it's not pretty because I'm not a great visual designer, but what the imaginary prototype is testing is not about design. It's about a process, about drawing customers through a flow. And so I'm not testing the visual design and seeing if they like the shape of my logo. I'm testing if they understand the flow and if it's intuitive or if they get confused or drop out. And that Keeley prototypes are not permanent. So this is really the most important. I probably should have made it bigger, but I have another slide for that prototypes are not the first iteration of a project. So if you can, my ideal situation is if you build a prototype in its own repository and then you do not bring things as much as you can over into the final project. So it completely lives in its own safe environment so that the final project is basically protected from the prototype. So if you do some things just to make it work, then you aren't going to impact your final project by putting a bunch of gross, untested code in there. So when you're introducing prototyping into your flows, it's probably the most difficult thing to communicate to stakeholders that, because some people, especially not in the industry, will see a Photoshop document and say, well, it's done, right? And so that's also a point about fidelity. If you produce something that looks like it's done, they'll believe it's done. And so it's a very tricky line to cross. And when you're building prototypes, there's plenty of tools and companies who will sell you things. I'm pretty much sure that if I asked everyone to raise their hand if you used Balsamiq before, they're great tools for doing mock-ups and things like that. And they're very useful and plenty of people will take your money for it. However, in this talk, since we're at a JavaScript conference and we're powered by JavaScript, I realize that that's actually decently applicable to this talk, I want to talk a little about Express and when I might use Express to, obviously it's a great application framework. Well, not obviously, I'll tell you about it. But it's a great application framework, but it's also especially accessible to beginners or people who just want to use some of the tools to supercharge you at the beginning of a prototyping process. So Express is a web application framework for Node. You can find it at express.js.com. Three core features of Express and why it's great for web applications, of course, but also especially great for just getting up and running in prototypes really quickly is it has the core stuff of routes, requests, and views. So I can write a route, I can send a response, and I can make a bunch of views for it really easily. So I can, say, use all those things so yes, I can build prototypes in pure HTML and CSS, but if I end up in copy pasta land where I have to paste my header code or the title bar a million times, it feels like I've gone back in time, and I don't like doing that. And so Express gives me that sugar on top of what you already get in Node it's really easy to make a web server in Node. So Express is a framework that just gives you a little bit more analogous to Sinatra or Flask. So it gives you just a little bit more to make it really, really easy to write a web application. So the nice thing about being really small is that Express is enough of what you want, but it's small enough to get out of your way. And so that's especially key when you're building things in Node, is that Node is a fantastic engine for you to squeeze performance out of it, but if you build a huge framework on top of it and it makes a lot of decisions for you, then you lose some of that control. So you remain in control of the performance of your application with Express because it's so small. So all those features sound great for making a web app or prototype. And another great thing about Express is that there is a cheat to win mode where you have a command line utility. And that's actually what I use that to generate the beginnings of the sample app. So you globally install Express, that's the G, and then you just use the command line utility to express appname or express dot if you want to make it in the same directory. So you can use Express to serve prototypes, get you building prototypes faster. You can use it to build full applications. It's definitely a healthy framework now. And you can have as kind of D. Shaw was talking about, to have that span of the full JavaScript stack. So I want to show you the front and the back of the very simple prototype I built just for this talk. So try to get all my slidiness. All right, so this is my new startup, you guys. It's called Bike Fantastic. You can buy bike stuff. So I like bicycles, and so when I was trying to think of a demo thing, it's hard to think of a demo sometimes to invent a fake problem. And one of my friends was saying, I'm actually training for the Bike MS ride in a few weeks, and so she said, well, why don't you just use bicycles? And so these are images from Creative Commons on Flickr, so the attribution is in the file name if you want to find out who took these beautiful pictures. And so I can click Buy Me, and then I'm in my cart, so my e-commerce workflow, the Pay Now button. There's payment stuff that I have not built yet. Confirm, and thank you for your purchase. So this is still not even really very built out, but I wanted to make a very, very completely simple thing of let's start the least that I can do to make a workflow. Because say even the payment thing could be, instead of payment, the Pay Now could have been pay with PayPal, and then you would have gone through the PayPal workflow or something. So that could even been abstracted away. So let's look at what I did in the code. So the majority of this, the vast majority of it was generated with the cheat to win code. So the core that you need, oh, this is going to be really small. I noticed that people didn't make their stuff bigger. It's hard to see this stuff, even though these are small rooms. Anyway, so this one is really the thing you need. Express, App Express. And then the rest of the stuff is kind of what the generator gives to give you the nice to haves. It sets up your static directories. It sets you up to use Jade templating so that you don't have to, I like using templating languages because I get bored writing all my Angular brackets. And then, oh, actually I already read that. So this is calling these routes files that are in a routes directory up here. But you can also, of course, there's a callback. So you just do the callback, request response, and then that's the response send foo. So this was the route it came in. So this is what I changed in the index. I have it read a folder of bike images and then render those in the view. So it is very, very quick and dirty. And so I kind of I like showing how simple prototypes can be and how much you can cheat if you want to. So I actually don't like when people say, oh, it only took me so long to do this. But I probably spent a little less than an hour on this. I just don't want to say I spent hours, but because I didn't. But it took probably significantly less than an hour just to generate this, build out some of the front end, write some style, not very much. And so I make up fake prices and put those in the view and wrote some CSS. So, and then you get, it's going to get crazy. There we go. So Bike Fantastic, and then you get Bike Fantastic. And so, and if you wanted to see the code of Bike Fantastic, it is on GitHub. It is an example of really, really a simple prototype and how easy it is to get started in Express. So I like the generator, and also the generator is great too in general for making real applications because unlike certain web application generators, you don't have to delete a whole lot of stuff after you use the generator. It really just gives you some nice stuff to get you started, and most of the things it gives you are useful. So it's pretty fun. All right. So that's prototyping using Express, and it's ridiculously easy to get started. And another prototyping option that I did want to mention is static sites. So as I said, I talk to people who do prototyping, and they say, well, I use just HTML and CSS just alone, but then if you say do a static site generator, so what's a static site generator? So you build a website without a server, essentially. And so actually on my podcast with my friends, Turing Incomplete, which you can follow on Twitter at TuringCool, you can listen to our podcast. But static site generators, you see them more in Ruby for building the statically generated sites because the equivalent in JavaScript is just grunt build. So you can put in all your plugins and everything, and so you can have your views and translate everything into a static site and use all those power tools that we have, Sass and downloading packages in Bower and all that kind of stuff. So I actually would be interested to see more people doing prototyping in static site generators and more grunt stuff around, a simple prototyping flow for grunt. So on prototyping, they're not difficult to build. So I showed you kind of even under the hood of a very quick and dirty prototype for my new startup, Bike Fantastic, that Express is pretty nifty for small or large projects, but it's not always necessary. So static sites, all glory to the build. So if you love your static site generators that I have a lot of friends who love, then go for it. And one of my favorite articles on Express is Understanding Express from Evan Hahn, and of course we're at a Manning conference and he has a book coming out. So I did want to let you all know about that. So on kind of remember our multiple topics. So the only way to know whether an idea is reasonable is to test it. So if we built prototypes, but we don't do anything with them, then there's not really any point. Because remember the early to learn from, early to test and then learn. So the Design of Everyday Things is a great book, and basically the whole chapter on design thinking has a lot about this talk, or you understand me. So why do we user test? So usability, but what do we talk about when we talk about usability? So usability, does it do what you need? Utility, does it do what you need? Usability, ease and pleasure of use, and then useful is the combination of those two things. So those are the U's of usability. To put another way, Liz Sanders coined this phrase that a friend of mine likes to use in her talks, and I really, really like it. That you have useful, usable, and desirable. And so that kind of gets into more of the designer's world, that you have to be able to use it. It has to be usable. It needs to solve the right problem, so it needs to be useful. But then ideally, that, extra awesomeness is if it's desirable, if people want to use it. So you solve the right problem, people can use it, and you solved it in such a way that it solves the pain that they have. So it solves the right problem in the right way, and that's why people use your product. And then another way to say that would be it's needed, it's understandable, and then wanted and enjoyable, so that people want what you have produced. And so I put together kind of 4 tips for user testing and making it more accessible to developers and starting to understand this world of usability that we have such great expertise on. It's a really big field, but we can always learn a bit more about it in our industry. So one, test early. And actually these photos are from user tests that I did a couple years ago. And so this is my friend Eric walking through a prototype of a concept that I was talking about. So it was a project where I was testing out prototyping and user testing. It was kind of one of my first forays. And so number 1 is test early. So if you're going to learn from it, it's really helpful if you learn early, because it's easier to fix something during week 1 rather than week 10 or week 52 or D. Shaw again about 6 months later or 24 months later. So testing early to get that information early so that you can move on more informed and to make better decisions based on what you've learned. 2, look for heuristics violations. So what's a heuristic? It's one of those many fancy words. So again, I used Yieldy Wikipedia. So experience-based techniques, and then emphasis added that they're good enough. So heuristics are kind of, you would call them maybe a rule of thumb, to use another idiom. And so then, because that's an idiom, you write it out kind of like this. So some examples. So the Nielsen group kind of has the 10 classic usability heuristics. I don't have all of them on here, but there's the blog on there if you want to go look at it. So I have a couple examples of these to show you of, say, visible system status, error prevention, and consistency in standards. So what this helps you with is when you're doing user testing, and especially because you're observing people walking through a product, usually you'll give them a script, and you'll say, you're going to go to this part of the website, and I want you to complete this task. And then you let them go, and you let them try and figure out how to complete the task. And when you see bumps, that's when you write down observations and then you can synthesize those, and heuristics are the things that help you synthesize them. So if I observe that someone had an issue with my very crude pay now system in Bike Fantastic, then it probably violates umpteen heuristics. But I can look at the rule of thumb that it violates, so I can try and solve the root problem. So back to the trying to always solve the root problem than just any problem. So examples of people doing this right. So these are my friends at Paperless Post. And you see this all the time. So you see the spinny loader is an example of visible system status. Anytime you see a spinny loader, it is telling you that something is happening in the system, hopefully with descriptive text, so that your user knows that something is happening and they know that the system is working and they haven't done anything wrong, and so they know what's going on. So in Paperless Post, what's happening right here is this actually happens after you create a card. It's doing the image processing. And so it's just giving a user kind of a non-technical way of saying that we're finishing the card. If it doesn't load, then go back and resave, which is just a way around of saying, well, if the image generation failed, go back and kick off the image generation again. So they give people more information about solving their own problems as well, which kind of leads into error prevention. So I have a friend who says a really funny phrase. He says foot guns. So he says that in an ideal situation, you have few foot guns, that is, guns with which you would shoot yourself in the foot. And so error prevention is preventing foot guns. And so anytime you exit Word and ask if you want to save, that's error prevention. So putting up those areas where people often make errors or often make mistakes and shoot themselves in the foot and helping them not create those problems. So error prevention. So in this, you're about to delete the envelope. So it tells you you're about to do something, and furthermore, here's the consequences of it. So deleting the envelope displays the card directly in the email, just so you know. So it tells you the consequences of your action. And of course, undo and redo are very key to error prevention. So having undo and redo whenever you can, so that people can easily recover. They can prevent errors and recover from errors. And here's the bad example. So consistency and standards. And I was showing this to someone, and they said, well, it's almost cheating that you use a restaurant website because they're all awful. That's true, but this one's especially awful. And so if you want to look at it, I do warn you that there's a marquee tag on there, so you have been warned. So consistency, why is this a violation of consistency and standards? So when I go to a website, there's only so many ways that I expect to get around a website. I expect a top navigation bar, sometimes a side navigation bar, but there's generally a way to get around. When I go here, I have no idea what to do. So, and I actually saw another example of this, again, cheating because it's a restaurant website, but I wanted to show that if I can. Slide. Come on. All right, hold on. All right, there it is. All right, what do we do? Okay. Oh, it's a game. This is a restaurant website. Of course it is. But why would you do this to people? I don't really know. But I ate lunch here yesterday, and it's actually really good. I'm from Philadelphia, and if you visit Philadelphia, they have very good stuff. It's a hummuseria. So very tasty food, very poor website. So it's violating consistency and standards because there's kind of a standard way that we understand navigation on websites, and this completely violates it. So if they user tested this, they would probably very easily see that this isn't very usable, and hopefully they would then solve that problem. Damn it. Sorry. All right. So third tip. So look for anger. So I told you these are from real user tests. So this is my buddy Mark Dominus from my co-working space, and he got really angry at my prototype, and that's how I got this tip. And so especially when you are new to user testing and it's a very accessible methodology because you will always learn something. Even if you aren't a user experience expert, you don't have to be an expert to be able to learn something from it. And so I could see where Mark got really frustrated. So when I got frustrated with my hummus website because I didn't know what to do, as Mark got angry with my prototype when I was doing these user tests. And the reason emotion is informative is because people will lie to you. So it's because we're humans, and so when we are talking to each other, if you're asking your test subject, your subject question, they're going to want to try and give you the answer that they think that you want to hear. They won't even know that they're doing this. It's just a very natural thing. It's kind of a standard understood thing in research that, that by observing the result, you change the outcome. So that people will lie to you. And so emotions are very informative because they're a lot harder to lie about. So it means that your observations are key. But the corollary of this is that user testing is not expert feedback. So I wanted to fit this in somewhere, that one of the reasons why emotion is so informative is it helps find that right problem to solve. That if you're showing or demoing a prototype to a customer and all they have to comment on is your brand color scheme, that it could be the right problem to solve, but I don't think that's very likely. So user testing is not expert feedback, and that's also why kind of the magic number for user testing is you only need a few. You can do about 3 to 5 user tests to kind of see what common things come up. So people will often get frustrated at certain key points. And so when you see something repeat across multiple user tests, it means that you should probably look for the root cause that's causing that frustration. And so you'll only be able to learn from this stuff if you document it. And so I took pictures, and that was actually part of that project, was taking pictures in the user test. And part of it was that, for me, I actually ended up using it as a memory tool, because another point on there is take limited notes, because remember, your presence is impacting the subject, because remember, we're doing kind of guerrilla testing. We don't have this fancy equipment. If you do, awesome. And there's also some remote testing utilities that are really cool. But assuming you're in the same room as your subject, you don't want to influence them too much by making them feel like a lab rat. So you take limited notes. You maybe take a picture or two just to help jog your memory of the point in time. And also don't stand in front of your subject, because then you have that kind of performance relationship again. So those are the tips, but then once you've done all that, it's all about iteration. So again, tapping onto the design of everyday things, that your test only matters. So your prototype only matters if you test it, but your test only matters if you learn from it. And you only learn from it if you did something with it. So with each cycle, your tests and observations can become more targeted and more efficient. And so that's also a point about doing multiple rounds of testing when you can, because it's great to test once and then get some feedback, but if you don't test again, you don't know if you solved the problem. It's only through a test that you know if you solved the problem. So in user testing, do it early, observe, and document. And of course, the canonical thing, which everyone should always read or read again, is Don't Make Me Think. It's fantastic. It makes user testing and the concepts around it and usability really, really accessible. And so the summary of the talk is that you can use prototyping to cheaply produce something to show, that Express is quick and fun, and it's a cool thing to check out if you haven't, and that user testing is very accessible and you can do it. So you can use it to learn a lot about what you're doing. But then this is information, Pam Selle, Web of War, Turing Complete, and I have a book coming out on JavaScript frameworks, and actually I'll be sending out a discount code on that. So check out the website. I'll put up the code probably later today, or you can get on the list and then I'll email you the code. So, all right, thanks.